What does it mean to you when something's weird? Do you believe that to be a negative connotation, positive, or neutral? Because the word can be used in all three connotations. A general sense of weirdness is not inherently negative, despite what bullies on a playground might feel. For something to be weird, it just means it's unusual, unexpected, or maybe supernatural, in the most literal sense of the word. Now, I am far from the first person to ever suggest the idea that our differences can make us better, and that being weird is not a bad thing. Public schools have been running that gambit for the better part of the last 24 years. Not that all schools live up to the embracement of the weird that they espouse, but the topic of weirdness and the importance of imperfection has rarely been so skillfully tackled to not come across as an after-school special as in today's film. This movie sets weirdness front and center as a part of the primary rather than secondary storyline. Truly, not since Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling have we seen such a tour de force of weirdness be conveyed to an audience as not simply okay and allowable, but innately worthy of its own existence, and worthy of finding its own happy ending. Today, I want to look at what I would argue is one of the weirdest films Disney put out in the early 2000s. It's a movie with a whole lot of character and heartfelt artistry poured into it that can feel almost overlooked at times. I think the most apt description I could give this movie would be that I feel that it's understated in the popular zeitgeist. To adequate caveat though, that isn't to say that I think this is an underrated or unpopular movie. In fact, it spawned a franchise with possibly the most sequels of any Disney animated movie. It even had a short-lived TV series, several short animations, its own ride at Disney World, an anime, and its main character remains possibly one of the most ubiquitous merch items the company makes. I mean, these cute little guys on everything. Have you guessed the movie yet? I mean, probably. It's in the thumbnail. But get weird with me today and learn what it means to be family with Lilo and Stitch. Alright, so let's start first by addressing what I mean when I say that this is a weird movie for Disney, because like I said, you would be absolutely right to say that the Mouse House fully embraces this movie, and it performs as a juggernaut of merch sales. And it's not weird in an avant-garde way, since it's not one of the most artistically interesting films they've ever made. Not to say that it doesn't have some great animation. The watercolored backgrounds alone are a blast from the past not seen since the golden age of Disney, and are stunning for sure. But there's definitely a lack of sweeping animated set pieces associated with Disney movies of the preceding decade. It's not an especially groundbreaking technical marvel either, but all that might be because of where it was made, which weirdly enough was at Disney World. That's right, this was the second of 3 movies ever made in Disney Hollywood Studios, then Disney MGM Studios in Orlando, Florida. Lilo and Stitch shares its origins with Mulan and Brother Bear of all things, so even from the start, this movie originates out of an outlier animation studio. But what begins to set it apart is the fact that this movie is one of the few Disney films to not be an adaptation. It's a totally original idea. In fact, the movie even makes a point of telling you this at the start. This isn't an old Tales Grimm story or classic literature or any sort of existing fable, fairy tale, or fictional folklore. Lilo and Stitch is entirely original. Now, that might sound unimportant, but part of understanding what makes Lilo and Stitch special is understanding that it was viewed as a bit of a gamble. It starts in 1997. Several executives at Disney Feature Animation were invited to a retreat at Michael Eisner's farm. The idea for this retreat was to help realign the animation studio going into the new millennium, to discuss the future animation slate beyond adapting pre-existing legends, folklore, or classic novels. It was at this retreat where the then executive vice president, Thomas Schumacher, suggested they produce a film that would be the quote, Dumbo for our generation. What does that mean? Well, Schumacher said he meant, quote, what could be a smaller movie that comes out as a real expression of an artist that is both simpler from a production value point of view, but no less simple or heartfelt than any of the big movies. So compared to the large budget Disney animated features being slated, the idea of Lilo and Stitch was to allow a more singular artistic vision to guide the production, with the trade-off being that there was going to be less cost or less funding required for the project. This sort of sets the origins of this movie in this really scrappy tone, not being given the same splashy budgets provided to its contemporaries. Having a budget of $80 million compared to The Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, and Treasure Planet all having budgets of $100, $120, and $140 million respectively. Don't get me wrong though, this wasn't a shoestring budget film. It's worth noting that the advertising budget was likely larger than some of those contemporaries, but we'll touch a bit more on that later. So this movie was to be the new generation's Dumbo, an animated film driven by a small team's artistic vision, and that vision starts with an idea for a children's book that the writer and director Chris Sanders had in 1984, but it certainly shifts as the animation team assembles and helps to navigate the uncharted territory of a non-adaptive movie. And the pitch for this movie shifted a lot in development, from being about a forest creature to an alien crime lord to an alien crime lord on Earth living amongst humans, to having a child companion, to a rural location of humans, to eventually the island of Hawaii. It's honestly astounding to hear the original ideas versus what this movie becomes, because it was free to morph and grow unlike many previous Disney films. At the start, there was no sci-fi elements, no Hawaii, no Lilo. But as these elements got added, so too did new topics and themes that helped to further the individuality found within this film's story. Part of this is what makes the film feel so understated in culture, however, as people tend to remember the silliness and the weirdness of the movie's cute and fluffy protagonist, or of Lilo's picture project. People tend to forget how innovative this movie was for Disney's storytelling, and how adult its topics could be as these storyboard ideas got further and further away from the normal Disney fare. The story of Lilo and Stitch doesn't go for that tale as old as time feel of Disney, and instead features fractured family dynamics with sisters rather than parental or pseudo-parental relationships. It's a storyline that examines what a nurturing environment looks like for a child, asking questions on what is best for the child, with Cobra Bubbles and Child Protective Services looming over Nani and Lilo. But they aren't being portrayed as villains or antagonists. This isn't CPS as the boogeyman, or a save the farm for the big corporation and banks type story. There are legitimate concerns woven into this story for CPS to be involved with. I will say, there is this undertone to the story beat of the government splitting a native Hawaiian family up because they think putting Lilo in the system is a better life for her that adds an almost sense of dread to the situation. I don't necessarily think it was a totally conscious story beat that Chris Sanders added to the film. As I said, the story wasn't originally set in Hawaii, but there certainly was a conscious effort to carefully approach the native Hawaiian identity of Nani and Lilo within the story. It's subtle, but it's certainly one of the elements that I think is understated about this movie. In fact, like I'd mentioned before with Lilo's seemingly weird habit of taking photos of random tourists. While seemingly played for laughs initially, it hides a deeper story. We see from some scenes cut in early animation that Lilo experiences further isolationism in her life from being treated as a sideshow by tourists on the island.
Oh look, a real native!
Treated as an attraction of the little native girl, fleshing out the vacation experience for these tourists.
Hey kid, where's the beach? My halo!
Hey, speak English? Which way to the beach?
It's an experience very real for many native Hawaiians, and so her photography is part of an effort to reclaim some semblance of agency over this part of her identity. So she places the tourists in the role of sideshow attraction. It's a storyline that's mostly dropped from the final cut, but it still echoes through the film. So from these instances, we do know that Hawaiian representation was consciously thought about during the production of this movie. Additionally, voice actors for Nani and David were given relatively free rein to rewrite and add lines to provide a more genuine experience and authentic slang and language to their lines, to add a Hawaiian perspective to characterization on the film. Attention to culture was given on this project, though limited attention in fairness, but enough for it to have been a big deal in 2002. They made effort to study cultural dances, ask about native experiences, and give some platform to native voices. Again, not perfect, but leagues ahead of some other Disney projects. So I can't help but feel that this element of stigma towards government intervention would cross Chris Sanders' mind in involving groups like CPS, and that narratively adds something sinister feeling. Within the storyline, it even works out to fit as a subtle symbolic connection between Lilo and Stitch. We can see the similarities of institutions of government believing that they know best between CPS and the Grand Council in space, and it's actually pretty interesting. It provides this comparative story element between Stitch and Lilo, as both lack agency and are being made beholden to the decisions of bureaucratic institutions. Looking at certain aspects of the movie through this lens, connecting to the history we know of government abuses faced by Native and Aboriginal populations in Hawaii,
If you lived here, you'd understand.
we can view the judgment being so hastily passed on Stitch with little thought to the consequences beyond upholding bureaucratic procedure as tangentially connected to the CPS encroachment on Nani and Lilo's lives. But we'll put a pin in that element for now. My point here really is just that this movie is taking big swings at big topics, and these topics aren't normal Disney fare. They're incredibly adult and yet are being put front and center in this children's movie. Scenes depicting the hardships and realities of economic desperation, as Nani tries to find a job to make ends meet and support her sister as the only guardian and family that Lilo has left, and the remnants of the only family she's ever known. All to stave Child Protective Services taking Lilo away. It's a lot for a side story in a Disney movie. It's not freedom for the genie or eating bugs and learning about a carefree lifestyle. It's not any of the normal B stories we get, all of which are normally emotional and fulfilling storylines, but Lilo and Stitch just gets into a new topic for a new age of Disney post-Renaissance. There's a focus on community in this story as well, as the town knows the hardship Lilo's family is going through. Lilo's hula teacher, Moses Paloki, the cafe owner, Kiki, Old Man Kuakani of the convenience store, and many other unnamed characters, all are shown to be empathetic to the situation, and it helps to create this really touching notion around the movie that people believe in Nani and Lilo and want them to succeed. The weirdness of Lilo is characterized by these hardships within her life. She doesn't feel, quote, normal because her situation isn't normal, and neither is Stitch's situation. But the point the movie gets at is that that doesn't mean they're undeserving of happiness within those lives. We'll get more into the story as we go, but all this is really just to underscore how big a departure this movie was for Disney's normal, which makes its success so important. It found an audience. It showed that it's viable to get a little weird with your art, to explore stories and themes that, while heavy, can connect with an audience. And it was no small feat convincing Disney that this story and project would want to be heard. There's all sorts of hurdles the creators ran into, with test audiences, corporate feedback, and even real-world events causing this movie to need reworking and changes for Disney to release it. Marketing a project like this is difficult, because how do you market that kind of a story under the Disney brand? How do you market something so weird? Well, you lean into it. You embrace that this is something different than normal. And in the case of Lilo and Stitch, you even point that out by contrasting the movie against your past projects. The marketing campaign for Lilo and Stitch, for those unaware, was bonkers. It centralized around another idea from Chris Sanders of what if Stitch invaded the other Disney movies, breaking open the Disney vault, bringing back original voice actors to reprise their roles. Stitch was placed front and center as interrupting, causing chaos, and just being a little blue menace in other Disney properties. And these were big hitter properties too. This wasn't like Chicken Little. This was Lion King, Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. Using sequences from all these films, short little trailer spots featured Stitch as this black sheep of Disney to communicate just how odd a departure from the norm this film was set to be. To put it into better perspective, this was from back when crossover media was quite rare for the most part, before multiversal media swept the multiplex. And given that Disney is normally fiercely protective of IPs, even internally, for Sanders to have been able to swing this was crazy in and of itself. The marketing of this movie could honestly get its own video, but the takeaway from all this was really just to underscore how different a project Lilo and Stitch was. The fact that it turned into a huge success is great, but recognizing how much of a strange gamble it was feels important in discussing how the film communicates its ideas around weirdness, how the film unapologetically puts forward its differences and embraces the weird. I think in some ways that's why it clicked with people. It was something new and unformulaic. But beyond the marketing, that's not the point of this video. There's way more to take away from this film than just the success of putting original artistic visions front and center in animation. Not that that isn't commendable in and of itself, but there's something more Lilo and Stitch is representative of. As I've mentioned, I think this movie's understated for how important it was as a departure from the norm and for making an effort to do representation done right. People do love this movie, and it's certainly been given its flowers, but it's often not given the level of attention beyond a cursory mention that I think it ought to. It's so much more than just a fun, silly movie. I think it's worth talking about because of the adult topics it highlights that are abnormal to find in a Disney film, but more so than that, the exploration into non-traditional familial setups we get through this film. There is importance to representing differences in society. Representation matters, and in the case of Lilo and Stitch, this movie takes the leap to show that an unconventional family can still be a loving and caring one. It doesn't try to make it seem like the home life setup is in any way perfect or without problems. In fact, a key story beat is the issues that Nani and Lilo experience in life because of their situation. But it is still a really big step forward for Disney to have shown this off in 2002. This movie makes a statement that while there are hardships added to Lilo and Nani's lives due to their situation, they're no less deserving of love and family. They're all each other has, and neither means to cause the other trouble, but life is complicated. In real life, this situation plays out all across the globe, and to get to see a child going through what you are, or having a similarly fractured family, is amazingly impactful for people to get to witness. It's not a quantifiable thing, but getting to see the relationship play out is masterful, and I think really helps to normalize the non-nuclear family. In providing this representation, we get a look into why Lilo is how she is, and the movie makes no excuse or apology for the social weirdness Lilo exudes. It instead embraces it. It doesn't romanticize the situation, but it also doesn't pass it off as disparaging or decry either Lilo or Nani's characters as having failed in life somehow, or needing to be fixed. Would some extra cash or an extra set of hands help in raising Lilo? Sure, obviously. That would always help. A friend group to socialize with would be great for her, and not raising a child you didn't ask for would be great for Nani. There are problems in their lives that are created by their situation. Nani lacks the freedom and time to date David. Lilo is often left to fend for herself and has no social circle to rely upon. But the relationship these sisters have is still meaningful, loving, nurturing, and mutual. The movie could have easily made the familial situation a literary device to depict moral failings, but it doesn't. It doesn't put down Nani or her efforts at raising Lilo. It doesn't shame Lilo's lack of connection with her peers. It just presents them as matter of fact, as part of the world, but not evil or problematic. Their personalities and their family is not inherently some issue to be solved. Now, you might think that that's the norm in movies like this, but in other movies like Mary Poppins, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, The Little Mermaid, Hercules, and even this film's contemporary Treasure Planet, the narrative of the family dynamic is treated as something needing to be fixed and changed to make things right. That change can be accomplished in many ways. Sometimes it's parents learning new lessons, a character maturing, a maternal or paternal figure being added to the situation, a husband being found, and many more avenues exist. But my point here is that in this movie, Nani and Lilo don't require a third party. They aren't changed by the end of the film. In fact, their lives are more chaotic with Stitch and the others. Like I said, the movie explicitly notes that
I really believed they had a chance. Then you came along.
the sisterhood of Nani and Lilo is allowed to emotionally play out for the audience, but Lilo and Nani are not wildly different characters from the start to end of this film, because they didn't need to change. Lilo is already in a good, nurturing environment. While the ending does still expand their family with Stitch, Pleakley, David, Jumba, and to a much lesser extent, Cobra Bubbles, these characters come to join the family as their own unique entries, not as new replacement parental figures or as characters fulfilling a role of fixing family dynamics. They may add to it, but they bring their own pros and cons. They aren't morality police chastising the way things were, they're new natural elements. Evolutions unto the family dynamic. As characters, they're more friends or uncles. It may seem like a small distinction here, but I promise you it is important to highlight that distinct difference. Namely, as it factors into the argument made by this movie for nurture over nature. The whole film itself is exploring the concept of nurture versus nature in both Lilo and in Stitch's stories, but while arriving at the same answer, it tackles the question slightly differently for each character. With Stitch, it's quite obvious from the start that he's an example of being created with singular purpose, destruction, and it's in his nature to attack, destroy, and cause havoc everywhere he goes. And yet, his journey through this story is being nurtured towards a more balanced existence. He doesn't have to be what he was made to be. His destiny is his own. But the story doesn't condemn him or his personality either. It instead offers an example example of how a nurturing environment can bring out the best in people's lives. The film develops this argument for nurture over nature from the moment our dynamic duo is put together. We start by first getting to see the natural predispositions of Stitch from how Jumba created him, contrasted with how Lilo and Nani's influences erode his more antagonistic tendencies, but distinctly doesn't undermine his chaotic personality. It's almost characterized as the acting out of a child. Since we're first introduced to Lilo as the quote problem child, a compelling comparative narrative is developed in a way that's approachable for the audience. Comparisons between Lilo and Stitch are almost immediately able to be drawn right from that first bite. The debate around nature versus nurture isn't new or original to Lilo and Stitch by any means, but I really do believe that it's well put together here. They demonstrate the gradual change to Stitch as he is acclimatizing to his new environment. He learns to share, protect, and empathize with the plights of others. This subtlety informs the audience of the nurturing environment Lilo comes from, and reinforces the understanding that Lilo is in a good home. We get to see, and are even literally told at times, that she's just doing for Stitch what Nani does with her. Stitch's development comes from his time spent with Lilo and Nani. It's not an instant flip of the switch, and Stitch isn't the model citizen Cobra Bubbles wants by the end, but he is growing. The part that makes this interesting is the subtext that aligns Stitch and Lilo as characters and aligns their actions. Neither Stitch nor Lilo want to be burdens or bad. They can't always help themselves. But within a nurturing environment, they can grow beyond the problems of base impulses. In the context of Lilo being an orphan child, this examination into emotionally driven impulses is a great allegory for processing that grief and the impact of that trauma on her. While the movie never gets so explicit, it does acknowledge the feelings of Lilo and her desires to be good. Even from that opening sequence where Lilo impulsively acts but regrets her actions. She doesn't mean to act out, and her teacher recognizes this. To display that kind of storyline in a kids movie is important representation. It's so easy to have clean-cut characters who process emotion, quote, normally. But this is a character with behavioral issues linked to trauma, isolationism, and what could be viewed as stunted sociability. In recent years, some people, like Heather Wake, a staff writer for Upworthy, have even argued that Lilo is early representation in media of neurodivergent characters. While I don't think I can go so far as to say there was authorial intent for that, in reading up on different articles and blog posts and forums, it certainly can be said that a genuine feeling of representation exists amongst fans of the movie. And that's important in and of itself. It's also kind of groundbreaking for its time. This film embraces those breaks from the conventional norm and celebrates these varied identities and approaches to life unlike any Disney film before it. Gone are the leading man heroes and princesses of the quote normal Disney fare. Not that those stories can't also be wonderful teachers or that representation cannot be folded into those types of films as well, but Lilo isn't wrapped up in some big saving the kingdom scheme. It's an intimate story that displays the importance of representation literally and the importance of imperfection narratively. What I mean by that is that figuring out where you belong in life is a long and complicated road. Arguably, there is no one true answer to be found. We all have to make the most of what time we have. Yet I think this movie does such a great job of opening the conversation to the idea that it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to aim to be the princess in the castle, the knight in shining armor, the king of the pride. You can have a great life in your own small corner of the universe, on a little island with no major cities. Life can be nice. The movie values imperfection, and it makes a statement to find your own way in life. Try new things, try a million things, and fail at a million things. None of it has to be perfect, or even go well. Finding where you fit in the world is the journey. Lilo and Stitch are a constant foil for each other in this practice of finding where you fit in the world. Lilo's journey sees her dealing with isolation over her weirdness, and despite being ostracized socially, she's still committed to being her most genuine self. We see this right from the start with her stories of Pudge the fish. She's so unapologetic about being herself. She is, however, apologetic about acting out when her emotions get the better of her. She wants to dance. She wants to be good. She practiced. As a character, Lilo has this wonderful through line of confidence in her peculiarities, embracing them, and pushing back against those that would abash her for it. But she doesn't believe herself to be above reproach. And I love how the movie communicates this. It's part of what makes this movie work so well and hold such a special place in my heart. Life is hard, and she's been dealt a tough hand. Lilo tries to connect with those around her. It's not her fault that society can be cruel to those that are different. And we see this same experience mirrored weird in Stitch. It's a wonderful narrative dance these two do together. You know, I really can't harp enough on how understated I feel opinions on this film are. I know it was successful, but it still feels like no one takes it seriously for the artistry it is. It highlights authenticity and embracement of the imperfect and the weird in a way that is so singular compared to its contemporaries. It's a movie that allows itself time to breathe and exist within a very intimate, if short, storyline. It's never a question in the movie of Lilo needing to change. Nani fully supports her, even if she doesn't always understand Lilo's eccentricities. Lilo isn't a perfect sister. She messes up, and she can be a burden. It's true, but these imperfections all add up to make her herself. Nani cannot provide a perfect childhood for Lilo, but she does her best and provides a loving childhood. Sure, they fight, as siblings do, but Nani does her best to get Lilo, to understand her, and to provide for her as a guardian in a way she doesn't have to. She's canonically only freshly 18 in the movie, just qualifying as an adult after the accident. The movie really ought to be understood in that lens, as the trauma of their parents' car accident is still fresh in both their minds. It's something that I am guilty of always having forgotten with this movie. I certainly never understood as a kid watching it, but Nani is making the best of the situation and attempting to stave off CPS, all while still just being a teenager. There's certainly some mistakes made, but make no mistake, this is a loving family. Like I said though, this film tackles some heavy adult topics, and this underscoring of being perfectly imperfect is critical to the narratives discussed. And that's why I think the family works. They're all perfectly imperfect. I mean, Lilo is just a few steps ahead of Stitch, really, having already found where she belongs with Nani. Stitch feels like the ugly duckling. Like Lilo, he feels ostracized and wants to know where he fits into life. They're two peas in a pod that way. It's not perfect. Like I said, it can be a mess at times, but I think this movie is so genius because it recognizes that life's a mess. A clean and orderly step-by-step plan for life will never survive in totality. Sometimes embracing the chaos is what makes life work. One of the most impactful themes this movie explores is just that, and how perfection is not a prerequisite for happiness. A family can be loving even if it has issues. Your relationships can be broken, but still good. That's part of what makes Stitch's journey in this film so wonderful and such a great foil to Lilo. He's searching for meaning and someone who would embrace him as he is, imperfections and all, while Lilo searches for someone she can embrace as a friend. Because Lilo is already confident in who she is. That's one of my favorite choices I think that the writers made. She's confident in herself. Her idiosyncrasies are never on trial in this movie. Lilo is just looking for someone to share in her confidence, in both senses of the word. You know, I've been trying to think on exactly how I'm gonna end this video for a good while now. At times, I worry I'm just been rambling on and on as I split hairs making my point, because I've written and rewritten so many parts of this video. Namely, I think because there's just so many thoughts I have on the movie, because there's a lot to be said. Heck, I didn't even explore most of the ensemble cast, or the sci-fi elements, the impact of 9/11 on the production and changes it caused, or even public reception. But maybe that's because I just think you already know all that. Like I said, it's a popular movie, and Stitch is an incredibly well-known character, but I feel the movie has always been done a disservice by being relegated to a fun family movie. It certainly is that, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Not everything needs to be some high art think piece, but Lilo and Stitch, I think, emerges not merely as another animated feature within the Disney canon, but as this transformative and culturally significant movie. I think it deserves to be thought of when considering movies that changed animation. There is nuance and authenticity here that shouldn't be overlooked, shouldn't be judged from just what it seems like on the outside. In essence, Lilo and Stitch transcends the bounds of a typical animated feature. Its success lies not only in its box office achievements, but in its ability to resonate with diverse audiences, offering a poignant and uplifting narrative that stands the test of time. A Dumbo for a new generation, I think, is fair to say. Maybe it's just that I adore the sentiment that the film espouses. I've been told that I can be a little too sentimental. But that idea that something broken isn't worthless, I think that there's just something great and noble about that. The film even tells us at the end, Lilo and Stitch's family is still broken by conventional measurements. It's not a quote normal family setup, it's abnormal, it's weird. But who cares that conventions are broken? Broken just means damaged or cracked, splintered into bits. It's not an inherent synonym for worthless. As a matter of fact, this movie breaks the conventions and formula of the quote Disney movie. So I'd say that makes this a Disney movie that's broken, but still good. Yeah, still good. I'll see you next time.